All right, welcome back to Pave the Way podcast. I'm here with two CPAs, Jeremias Ramos and Andrew Kabatchnick. And Andrew's actually a returning guest. He's the first repeat guest on the Pave the Way podcast. So that is a pretty cool thing, Andrew. So welcome back and welcome, Jeremias.
So we're happy to be here. So as Greg mentioned already, we're both CPAs. I personally work for myself. I handle accounts for a lot of small to medium business owners, many of which are in the real estate business, helping them kind of get started with their proper tax structures and how to keep track of all of their income and expenses, whether they're doing the flips or the buy and holds, or personally, like I do, doing a little bit of private money lending. I work with a couple hard money lenders, stuff like that.
Okay, awesome. So great stuff. And Jeremias, what's a little bit about your background? How'd you kind of get into all this accounting stuff?
Yeah, so I've been in the industry for about, I want to say 5 years now. I'm a tax supervisor in Witham, Smith & Brown. We're a pretty large accounting firm based in mostly New Jersey, but we do have an office in New York City. That's where I work out of. Right now, I mostly just work with high net worth individuals in our private service department. So essentially what we do is for higher net worth individuals who have large real estate holdings in New York City. As you can imagine, some of the places down here in New York City, you can have multi-million-dollar real estate holdings. So we handle a lot of the questions, tax questions for them, tax planning for them. And we're always looking out to the horizon of different issues in the industry and ways that our clients can, lower their tax burden ultimately.
Absolutely. So you said you're dealing with a lot of high net worth. Are these people who are they real estate investors to begin with, or they just have a lot of net worth and liquidity, and now they're looking to park some of that money in real estate, and that's when you kind of advise and consult with them?
So it's a little bit of both. A lot of it is generational wealth. Some people that they had real estate holdings in New York City way back when their grandchildren get passed down these large estates, and essentially they're multimillionaires, not because they invested it themselves, but because, it's passed down through the generations. So we do a lot of estate planning involved in that. And then we also have a lot of individuals that are just high net worth individuals who want to kind of mix up their portfolio. So it's not all in just the stock market. So we have a lot of clients in that end that they also trying to make substantial investments in real estate.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate you sharing that with everyone. So it's definitely an interesting kind of, thing that you get to work with on a daily basis. I'm sure you see some very, very obviously successful people. So today on the show, we're going to talk about a couple different things. The first thing we're going to talk about is actually opportunity zones, which is why we're bringing on Jeremiah. I actually connected me through Andrew, and I figured we'd just get two accountants on the same show, and we'll double our intelligence levels, double our tax levels. So if Jeremiah, this is more of a question for you. So if someone's not familiar with what an opportunity zone is, first of all, what is an opportunity zone? Because I'm not too familiar with this either, and I'm a real estate investor.
Yeah. So part of the new tax law that was passed in December of 2017, they passed Section 1400Z, which basically encompasses all of the opportunity zone laws that came out of the last year. The regulations are still preliminary, but we still have a good amount of guidance that we can give to our clients. So for anyone that doesn't understand of what an opportunity zone is, it's basically Congress came together, worked with several governors across all 50 states, and they determined which areas are in most need of investment. So these are low-income communities, areas where, the average income in that zone is going to be significantly less than the average in the United States. So looking out to the tax incentives, Congress wanted to give high net worth individuals, investors, those who are already investing in these areas, wanted to give them a little bit of a carrot in order to invest significantly more. So essentially the tax incentives are threefold. First, if you have a substantial capital gain, let's say I'm a high net worth individual. I have $1 million capital gain in a piece of art or a real estate holding or even stocks, right?
Let's say they bought Amazon or Google when it was
Yeah.
at its low.
Yeah, and they're
So, or even let's say you have Bitcoin, for example. Let's say I have Bitcoin and I'm a multimillionaire because I have Bitcoin. And I want to get out of some of that and maybe invest it into real estate properties.
sure.
What I could do is I can sell, let's say I have a capital gain of $1 million. Now, under these regulations, if I invest that fund into a qualified opportunity fund, then I can defer that for 7 years. So essentially, if I have $1 million capital gains tax, let's say it's a 23%, for example, 20% capital gains, plus you have the 3% Medicare investment tax.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, you have $230,000 you would have to pay to the government. You're essentially getting a tax-free loan for 7 years,
Wow.
as long as you reinvest that into one of these opportunity zones.
So it basically lets you keep that 250 grand though on that million and invest it and let it grow.
Yeah.
Essentially, yeah.
Right away. So you pretty much just store your capital and you can just keep recycling it and not having to just give it right away to the government. So Jeremias, when you say opportunity, so are these, just to sum it up for everyone, and then we'll get Andrew involved here. What are is it basically just a blight neighborhood where there's a lot of low income and they want to see the neighborhood turn? So they're saying, hey, if you guys invest in this neighborhood or these certain zip codes, let's say in any random city, we'll give you a incentive. And obviously that first incentive is the the deferred capital gain.
Yes. So there's many websites online that you can go to and see an opportunity zone map. They're based off of census tracts, which was the last census. I forget what the exact date was, but it was a couple years ago. So some of these neighborhoods aren't, for the most part, they're going to be economically deprived neighborhoods, but some of them are up and coming. So for example, Long Island City is an opportunity zone.
Really?
Yeah.
But it's really been built up over the last 4 or 5 years or something like that since the last census. So I'm thinking they might have to update these zip codes after the next census.
Yeah.
They might give us some new ones.
Interesting.
Yeah, and these zip codes are already locked in. So they're already a part of the law. And if you wanted to invest in them starting now, then you get all the tax incentives. So a lot of these areas are up and coming. If you hold it over the next 10 years, you could have substantial capital gains in those areas.
Very interesting. So that's the first pillar. What's the second pillar? What's the second? I think you said there's 3 kind of ways.
Yeah. So the second incentive is if you hold on to the investment, like let's say, for example, you sold your Amazon stock, you invested in one of these funds, that funds then invest in some of these properties. Let's say they buy a bunch of properties in these neighborhoods, they fix them up and they rent them out. If you hold that for 5 years, then you get a 10% haircut off that capital gain.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Really getting you to, if you can keep in those areas, because obviously the whole, the focus is you're investing in the area, which is turning the area, which is helping the economy, which then,
Yeah.
Is that the original $1 million capital gain or the capital gain just since you brought into the fund?
So that's the original capital gain. So if you have $1 million capital gain, a thing to remember is you're going to have to pay tax on that eventually, but that's going to be at the 7th year. So if you hold it for 5 years, you get a 10% haircut. So that $1 million gain turns into a $900,000 gain. And then if you hold it for another 2 years after that, so if you hold it for the 7th year, then you get another 5% discount. So essentially you get a 15% discount on that $1 million capital gain. But the only quirk to that is that it's based on dates. So to get the 10%, you have to invest by the end of this year. And then to get that additional 5%, you have to invest, 2 years after the end of this year.
Okay, so they make you have the deadline there.
Yeah. So
if you on that, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say this year is the rush to get in if you want to get in, the full total benefit of the tax.
So if you do that, you're saving 23.8% on in the $1 million example,
Mm-hmm.
23.8% of $150,000.
Correct.
So that's a lot of money there. That's a lot of
Yeah.
money. That's a good chunk of savings right there that you could be reinvesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's something that I think a lot of people they've probably heard this term get tossed around, but I don't think they've heard experts like Jeremiah and Andrew talk about this in length on a show. So, Jeremias, what's the third thing that the opportunity zone can provide?
Yeah. So the third tax incentive is pretty much like the holy grail of the tax code. Have you ever heard of, at death, you get a step up in basis?
No, I don't know what that means.
Yeah. So for example, let's say I have a $10 million property, right? And then I were to pass away and then pass it on to my children.
Yeah.
Let's say I bought the building for $1. So essentially I have a $10 million capital gain.
Yeah.
If I were to sell it, I would pay tax on $10 million.
Oh my
If
God.
I were to pass away and pass it on to my children, they would get a step up in basis. And if they sold it, they would pay no tax.
They would step up to the $10 million.
Yeah.
If you pass, and so that's common. That's why a lot of these real estate people just pass these properties on and on through their estates. Because if you have a $10 million property that, let's say you paid, I don't know, in the city, you bought it generations ago and you bought it for, let's say, $250K or even $1 million or whatever it was.
Oh my God.
That up to your kids at $10 million and saving all that tax. Now you have to remember there could be an estate tax, but there's ways to get around some of that.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
Definitely.
Trusts.
Does this property, Jeremiah, have to be an opportunity zone to do the step up or whatever?
No, that the step up for that I was talking about at the date of death, that's for everyone.
That's for everybody.
Wow.
Yeah.
But I think in the opportunity zones, you might be able to get it sooner.
Yeah. So for the opportunity zones, it's essentially you get the tax benefit of the step up without having to die, which is
okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. So if you hold that property for 10 years, let's say I invested something, I took that $1 million, I put it into an opportunity zone. If I hold it for 10 years and that $1 million turns into $2 million, if I were to sell that property, I wouldn't have to pay tax on that appreciation.
Because it was in the opportunity zone the whole time, which is the whole point of you revitalizing the area. Huh.
Correct.
And that's basically what I was trying to say before when they're giving huge tax incentives to invest in these areas, really.
Mm-hmm.
They want them built up.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. So Jeremias and Andrew, this is kind of a question for both people. I'll let Andrew probably go first, and then we'll have Jeremias answer second. So if you were you are an accountant. I was going to say if you were an accountant, you both are. You're an accountant, Andrew. You have a client who says, hey, listen, I want to really save myself some taxes this year. What are the first two things you would either ask the client to try to find out some more information, or you would tell the client if you knew enough information about them, just so I can get some different perspectives here? Because I have a lot of people listening to me now, and they, something that's probably always in the back of their mind, probably not the sexiest topic, is freaking taxes, right? And it's
until they realize how much money they could save.
Yeah. So what would be the first two things you would say? And let's say this is a successful real estate investor, not a newbie looking to set up their LLC. Like, this is someone who's successful, right? Who's making some serious money.
So the first thing that we always suggest if they're making good chunks of money is to look at the S corp, like we did, right? You might be able to, if you're paying yourself the reasonable salary, which is always a little bit up for debate, what that number really is. But you could be saving yourself some self-employment taxes, some Social Security and Medicare. The number two thing with this new tax law, if you're looking to invest in real estate, is looking into these opportunity zones, which I honestly just learned more about when I saw Jeremias a week or two ago. He taught me a lot of this stuff that he's speaking about now a couple weeks ago. And like you, I knew about them. I heard about them, but I didn't know quite this much about them until he told me about them.
Yeah. So number one, the S corporation, and number two, we can reiterate on that real quick. And then number two is the opportunity zone. So the S corporation, Andrew, is that so basically, what's the biggest benefit of having the S corporation? Even though you kind of hit on it, but like I think people probably have to hear this message a few times, because to them it might not click for the until the third or fourth time. Why is, and what are you doing when you have the S corporation? Why, what is the whole thing behind the salary and everything, and why is that actually more beneficial, even though it is a little bit more of a pain in the ass, because I do it myself?
It is. So when you open an S corp, when you open a regular LLC, whether it's a partnership or single member owned by yourself, right? Your net income, if you're active in the LLC, is probably going to be subject to Social Security and Medicare, right? If you do the S corp, right, the net income is not subject to the Social Security and Medicare. So you're going to say to me, why wouldn't I always do that? And the reason for that is the government could take a joke on part of the income, but they're going to come back and say, if you're taking distributions, you're going to have to pay yourself a salary for at least a decent portion of the money you're taking out of the business, right? They're not going to let you save the Social Security and Medicare on the full amount of your income from the business. That's not the way it goes. But we work to sort of defend a position that, yeah, fine, you pay yourself a salary on a portion of the income, but we kind of go back and forth. And generally speaking, I say if you're active, then you should be paying yourself probably somewhere in the vicinity of 50 to 60% of the money coming out should be in the way of a salary, and the rest could get onto that savings.
Okay. So this is how you avoid that self-employment tax, basically.
Yeah. Some people would call it evading.
Yeah.
That's not the way I like to look at it.
I don't think it's evading at all. You're using you're an accountant, right? You're playing the game to the most efficient way possible.
Yeah, and there's a fine line that the government might not like, but there's a fine line where if you're below there, you could kind of get yourself into trouble. So I tend to be like middle of the road between aggressive and conservative there, I think. Yeah,
because that self-employment tax is expensive. Ask me how
it can be.
I switched. So awesome. Well, that's good stuff. So that's the big thing. And the opportunity zones, we'll let actually Jeremias answer that question. So Jeremias, Andrew, the second thing he said was opportunity zones, right? So if you're advising a client, because the first part of the show I wanted to kind of introduce what's an opportunity zone, how is it beneficial. So let's say you're advising a client, right, into these opportunity zones. What would be the first few steps you would recommend them, and how do we, give the listeners some sort of a concrete track to run on from here moving forward?
So are you asking mostly like how would someone get involved in opportunity fund, or how to set one up?
Yeah, like how would they get involved? Let's say they have some money, they want to, invest in some opportunity funds. Like, what were the first couple steps you think they should do?
So the first discussion I would have is to see what level of involvement they want.
Yeah.
I know there's a couple opportunity funds out there already set up that if an investor wanted to go and throw some money in, they could. That would be the most passive option. Essentially, it would be just like investing in a REIT or any real estate entity. They would go through those advisors and give those funds, and then like any other entity, they would just receive a K1. If they wanted to get more involved, if they knew someone who's doing development projects, they could go through that route and have more of an active role, or they can go full in and, if you're someone who regularly purchase these properties, you renovate the properties and you do everything yourself, then you could definitely set up the entire structure yourself. And I think that's going to be the biggest bang for your buck, because of course, if you go through one of these other private organizations, they're going to take haircuts on top and they're going to take fees and whatnot. And essentially the tax benefits that you would receive, they're kind of baked into those fees already. So for those individuals who are trying to get the biggest bang for their buck, I would say, try to set up the fund yourself, try to target those properties if you can, if you are someone who's involved in real estate. But if you're more of a passive investor, then it might not be the most economically beneficial way to go.
Okay, understood completely. And you said, you mentioned the K1 at the end. So I'm assuming here, I could be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Is this GP-LP structure almost sort of like a syndication, or is this a little different than that?
It's a little different depending on how they set up the funds. So essentially, most funds are going to be set up as, one group fund, and that's where all the proceeds are going to be placed into. So if you're going to put $1 million into this fund, that's who's going to hold the fund. And then that fund is going to invest in different properties. And then those properties are going to shoot off, K1 income all up until the top. And then you're going to receive that flow through on your return.
Depending on how much, you have equity-wise.
Yeah.
Okay. Absolutely awesome. So this has definitely been interesting. The opportunity zone thing. I was not really too familiar with it, and Jeremias and Andrew have definitely cleared it up here. So, anything else before we transition to the next part of the show? Anything else we should leave the listeners with opportunity zones? Anything we missed maybe that they could use that could help benefit them? I mean, we'll give you obviously your contact information at the end of the show. Anything else that we didn't cover that maybe we can add before we transition on?
The only thing I would add is that the most recent regulations that came out in, I believe, April, they really expanded the rules so that it's not just for real estate, it's actually for business owners too.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. So if you're, let's say, for example, you're a startup and you sell software, right?
Okay.
As long as you meet one of the tests, which is either you pay more than 50% of your wages within the zone, if you have more than 50% of the hours worked within these zones, then your startup could potentially be sold tax-free if you hold it for 10 years.
Wow, that's crazy.
So these big pharmaceutical and software startups can have huge capital gains when they go public, sell to a VC firm or a private equity firm or something like that. If you're there 10 years, I think there's no tax. Am I wrong?
Correct. There's some issues depending on how the sale is conducted. So it might get tricky when you have, let's say an asset sale versus a stock sale. So if it's a clear stock sale, then you get the step up in basis. You wouldn't have to pay any tax. And the best part about it is that there's no limitation on, your revenues in and out of the fund, in and out of the opportunity zones. So you could have potentially a startup that has funds all throughout the nation, all, throughout the world, and you can still sell it and meet those guidelines and pretty much wipe out all your capital gains tax.
Wow. But this has to be in that specific location, though. That's the key, right? It's got to be in those areas.
Correct. And of course, there's substantial improvement tests that you have to tackle, all these other tests that you have to do on an annual basis. But, if you have someone who's organized and they can pass these hurdles every single year over the 10 years, then you can get, substantial tax savings.
Wow.
It's a huge savings. They're not going to make it totally easy to do, but in the end, there's certainly some worth to these tax savings for sure.
Yeah, it's worth it. I think the funny thing is, I think you guys can both attest to this because you're both CPAs. A lot of people, maybe in the beginning, they don't pay too much attention to the tax thing because they haven't gotten whammied yet. But then once they either pay a tax bill or get themselves in a tax quagmire, they all of a sudden they start calling everyone. They're like, "Oh, what do I do now?" And then all of a sudden, for life, they're hooked on taxes now, like Devin and I.
the thing is, it's so much easier for us to help you beforehand than it is for you to screw it up and have us fix it after. And if it's easier for us, that means it's easier and cheaper for you.
For you, exactly. So I'm glad you actually brought that up, Andrew, because in between, we're going to transition from topic to topic now. But as the transition happens right now, I want to actually go into what is the biggest mistake, besides the S-Corp thing, that you see a lot of either business owners or real estate investors make that gets them into trouble to then where now they have to dig themselves out of the hole? Like, what is a common thing that you see, and then how can people avoid that moving forward, because this is something I think a lot of people might either make this mistake, or they've made this mistake, or they've known someone who's made this mistake before.
This is across the board for any people and business owners, not just real estate people, is not planning ahead and trying to do your taxes and everything yourself. So many opportunities out there to plan ahead, use self-directed IRAs. Like I know we had spoken about that a while back. There's so many opportunities and things out there to do ahead of time that you going out and trying to save a few $100 on the preparation of your taxes is going to cost you tons of money in the end.
Yeah. Would you mean basically by like going to like a TurboTax and trying to do it, or something
Yeah,
like that?
TurboTax, stuff like that. And I mean, you see that less and less. Business owners get bigger and bigger. They start to realize that they shouldn't do that. But even so, like a lot of people, whether they're business owners or just plain old individuals, number one, they don't put the taxes aside to pay.
That's important.
They think that a lot of people, especially in the beginning, think that 100% of the money they get in is theirs to keep. I wish, but it's not. But that's where we come in to help you keep the most amount of that, the highest amount of that.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that is, I mean, so what you're saying here is basically they're going out and they're let's say they're doing a real estate deal, for example. Let's say they don't know about opportunity zones because they haven't talked to Jeremias. And they think that because they made $10,000 profit, that's all theirs. They shouldn't save it in a separate account for the tax bill that's going to come at the end of the year. And they spend it. And then at the end of the year, when they do their books and they see they made a little bit of a profit, now they have some money that's due, and they don't have the money now because they already spent it. So is that what you meant by that?
Yeah, it's either tied up in deals which is okay if you're making money.
Yeah, I do that. I do that.
Yeah, but if you're making money, that's one thing. You'll need some of the money eventually, but at least if you're making money, that's one thing. But then on other things, they'll blow it on cars and trips and
Rolexes. Yeah.
Crap and whatever. I don't know. It drives me crazy.
Yeah. So what's obviously this is probably a dumb question, but I'm just going to ask it. What can happen if an investor now gets himself in a situation, or a business owner, let's just say business owner, because I have other people listening to the show. What can then happen? Let's say they don't pay their taxes for the first year. Like what are some of the penalties and the processes that the IRS takes once this starts occurring? Because I want to scare some listeners to freaking doing their homework and calling you guys up to help.
Yeah. So if you file late, there could be, and the other thing is, if you think you're going to owe and don't have the money, do not hold off on filing. Do not hold off on filing. Let me repeat that. Do not hold off on filing. The penalties and interest are much worse for filing late than they are for filing on time and paying late. Much worse.
Much worse, yeah.
The penalties for filing late are 5% per month of the tax due. Plus, there's additional interest and everything like that. The penalties for just plain old paying late are 0.5% per month. 0.5% per month. That could still add up, but it's much less than filing late. Much less.
So file, and then if you have to defer the payment, then defer the payment. But file.
Now, there's still interest and penalties, but file on time, even if you think you won't have the money.
Wow. And does this affect your credit score, your taxes?
To tell you, I've never noticed it affect credit scores. I think if they put liens and if you get into the lien situations and all that, it could affect your credit. But I've never personally seen my client get that far. Jeremias, anything there?
No, I haven't seen anything in that regard. As long as you file on time and you have, a payment plan in place, or you're having communications with the IRS, typically it won't impact your credit score. But then again, I haven't seen a client that, they blatantly, not taken out taxes or had liens against them.
Yeah. Because they will do that eventually. They will put a lien on your name for the taxes, and they can.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Definitely.
Oh, yeah. I had to go. I went recently. I think it was maybe in the spring or something, with a client down to the IRS office and he didn't pay for years.
Oh man.
He owed probably like, I don't know, 75 to 100K. And unfortunately, he didn't have the money.
Yeah.
Luckily, we got that knocked down a bit.
Yeah.
But they had frozen his business and personal accounts, bank accounts, stuff like that.
Well, you got to pay your taxes, right? You're living.
And there's things to do to reduce what you owe, but the bottom line is done. You got to file them.
You got to file them, or else you're going to get in trouble. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. I appreciate that, Andrew. So as we transition now more, and we'll kind of end the show with this, just some stuff we talked about before we hit recording, some stuff that you're very passionate about is, you're an entrepreneur, you got your own firm. I guess you used to be working at an accounting firm. So what are some things that you've learned along your journey, as you've kind of started and it became very successful now as an accountant. So what are some of your big, mindset takeaways that you've learned that you can share with some of the listeners? Because people love the mindset stuff.
All I'm going to say is one of the biggest things is if you're thinking about doing something, there's no better time than now to get a plan into place, right? No matter how old you are, no matter how far along you are in your career, right? If you're thinking about doing something, start writing down your goals, getting action done, because the longer you wait, the less of a chance is you're going to do it, right?
All of diminishing intent. Absolutely. Yep. That is such a thing.
Number two, your goals and mindset are all about who you surround yourself with.
Yes.
If you have people telling you not to do it, or you can't do it, or you won't do it, guess what? They're right.
They're right.
If you have people telling you you can do it and you will do it, they're also probably right.
I love it.
It's about your mindset and who you surround yourself with, right? I'm lucky, right? I started my own firm and a little bit of my investing before we had our baby. And my whole family and my wife's family are a lot of people who have their own businesses, right? And my wife was nervous, of course, but she trusted that I would do the right thing for us.
Yeah.
So she said, look, I'm nervous, but I trust you. So do your thing and do it.
I love it.
I got support from our families, luckily.
I love it.
If you're not getting support like that,
it's tough.
It's tough, but you might need a new support system. What else can I say?
Yeah. And a lot of it is they don't see the proof of concept yet. And once they see the proof of concept and they see some of the money coming in, they start to warm up a little bit, like thawing chicken almost.
And Jeremias is big getting into this stuff also with we have a website that we write for, and Jeremias started this from scratch.
Yeah, tell us about this, Jeremias. This is awesome, because I was going to pivot to you right after Andrew. So, Andrew, that's fantastic advice, by the way. So,
yeah. And if you guys don't mind, I'm being kicked out of my conference room. So, I'll just keep this short real quick. But essentially, I started this blog about 2 years ago. I'm a huge tax nerd, so I just write mostly about different tax topics, how to pass the CPA exam, how to make a business, whatnot, pretty much different trends in the industry.
Yeah.
Over the last 2 years, I've pretty much grown it to, about 10,000 visitors per month.
That's awesome.
Have a pretty good following on LinkedIn. I have a pretty good email subscription. Right now, there's no advertisements on it. It's just a passion project. But I definitely get a lot of, client leads through it, people reaching out to me, asking different questions. So even though, I don't own my own business, I'm still entrepreneurial in that sense.
Definitely.
I love it. That's awesome. So I know you're getting kicked out of your conference room. What do you think the biggest lesson that you got, like from starting that was? Like, if you had to take one takeaway, like the 20% of things that have given you 80% of the value so far, what's that one thing?
I'd say the one thing is that a lot of people are scared to, do something because they think they're not good enough, or because, they don't know how to set up a website or whatnot. But half the battle is just trying. And I find that people, even if they're not good at it, if they just throw out content, if they just, go to networking events, if they just give presentations, even if they're not good at first, eventually you get better. And a lot of people aren't willing to try, so you're already ahead of the game just by, putting effort in.
I always say that, like showing up is like more than 50% of the game.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, like they might even read a book and get motivated, but the odds of them taking action from the content in that book are slim to none. So it's really not that crowded, right? I think once you kind of get a little bit of traction, like with your blog and with your firm and my business, like it's really not that hard to stand out as long as you're consistent and you have the right intentions. So I like how we kind of ended this podcast with the mindset stuff, because I think it's so powerful, and I think it's something that gets talked about a lot, but like I think the more you hear it, the better. So I really appreciate both of you. Go ahead, Andrew. Sorry about that.
I was just going to say, if anybody ever needs some motivation, we're always here to help.
Yeah, right. If they feel like they're stuck or lonely, they, reach us on social. We'd be happy to point them in the right direction.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
And I know Andrew's a big giver, and so is Jeremias. So I really appreciate both of you guys joining me today. So if people wanted to get in touch with, both of you guys respectively, I mean, Jeremias, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you and find out about some of the things that you might be able to offer people?
Yeah. So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So if anyone wants to just do a quick search on LinkedIn, Jeremias Ramos, tax supervisor with him, I'll pop up right away. Also, if you want to shoot me an email, I usually check my daily CPA email. So that's thedailycpa@gmail.com. And if anyone wants to, check out the website, see any updates in the recent tax laws and whatnot, it's thedailycpa.com.
Awesome. Well, I'll put that in the show notes right here. And then Andrew, what is the best way for people to get in touch with you?
The best way always for me is usually through email at akabatchnick@gmail.com. That's akabatchnick@gmail.com. I'm also somewhat active on LinkedIn and Facebook, so you can always find me there too.
Awesome. And your website's andrewcpa.com, right?
It's andrew-cpa.com.
Andrew-cpa.com. I think Andrew-cpa.com. All right, so we'll get your email and your website in there. Jeremias will get your information in there. And I'm sure some folks will be reaching out to both of you guys to learn more about how you can potentially help some of my listeners. So I appreciate both of you guys taking your valuable time out to be on the show, and hope you guys have a fantastic day.
All right, thanks, guys. Have a good one. See you later.
Thanks.